During World War II, the DeHavilland Mosquito developed the reputation of an aircraft that could hit the enemy just about anywhere. Despite the fact that it was constructed largely of wood, it carried a deadly warload which could deliver pinpoint attacks on the enemy hundreds of miles from its base. But which was the most daring raid the Mosquito embarked on during the conflict? By the end of this video, I want you to vote in the comments for your favourite, because I already know mine. Let's begin. The Quisling Raid. The Mosquito was used in various roles during the Second World War, but it is its role in propaganda and morale-boosting missions which is perhaps the most fascinating. After reaching 105 Squadron in November 1941, the Mosquito had already undergone an amazing journey of development. Unbelievably, the project had almost been scrapped as the Air Ministry couldn't get on board with an unarmed bomber. Thankfully, the Mozzie did make it off the drawing board and was in the hands of 4 105 Squadron pilots on the morning of the 25th of September 1942. At this point in the war, the Mosquito was still a closely guarded secret, and the general public did not know that the Wooden Wonder existed. Yet. That would all change. 105 Squadron was tasked with bombing a single building in the city of Oslo, which was over 500 miles away in Norway. While bombing the Victoria Theresa building, which was the headquarters of the Gestapo, the raid would also hopefully disrupt a rally being held by Vidkun Quisling, a Norwegian collaborator. 4 Mozzies made it to the coast of Norway, but were intercepted by 2 FW190s and lost 1 aircraft, which force landed after sustaining damage. Reaching the target, the other 3 aircraft did drop their bombs successfully, but one turned out to be a dud, and the other bombs crashed through the opposite wall before exploding. Several civilians were killed, and the exiled Norwegian government in London, not privy to the raid, afterwards voiced their concerns. Nevertheless, the raid had shown what could be achieved by the Mosquito, and it was seen as a fantastic propaganda tool, and so the British public and the world were told just what the Mosquito would be doing for the next 3 years. The Speeches Mission. One of the stories I was told as a child by my late neighbour Harold was when mosquitoes were used to disrupt important speeches in Germany. So as a kid, I always pictured a low-flying Mozzie, badly painted just like my Airfix models, racing over the heads of a crowd of saluting Nazis and blowing their hats off. Of course, that's not quite what happened. The 31st of January 1943, 105 Squadron took part in another long-range mission, this time to Berlin, where they were to become the first Mosquito unit to bomb the capital. This small bombing raid was to coincide with a speech Hermann Göring would be giving to a parade at 11 o'clock. This was a celebration of the 10-year anniversary of the Nazi Party, and the RAF intended to interrupt it. Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, had previously claimed that no Allied aircraft could bomb Berlin, and he was forced to hide in terror as he was proven wrong. His speech was delayed for at least an hour, by which time 105 Squadron was well on their way home. As it was a pretty big occasion for the Germans, the speeches would continue for most of the day, and so the RAF sent another small group of Mosquitoes to bomb Berlin again that afternoon. This time it was number 139 Squadron who sent Joseph Goebbels running to the air raid shelter. Although it would not have been a very strategically important operation, the comedy factor is priceless. What I would give to be able to see a picture of Goering's face as the first Mozzie flew over. Operation Jericho. Perhaps one of the best known precision raids of the war is another one which heavily features the Mosquito, Operation Jericho. I've always been fascinated by this mission, mostly because of the skills needed by the Mosquito pilots, but also by the bravery of the men on the ground. By the 18th of February 1944, 832 French prisoners were being held in Amiens prison, most of whom were French resistance members, with some Allied agents also being present. Among them were some senior resistance members who were privy to the key information about the upcoming invasion of France. So concerned were Allied leaders about the risk of their true invasion plans falling into the hands of the Gestapo, a rescue mission was launched. With no possibility of breaking these prisoners out on the ground, the problem was turned over to the RAF. And, as it often was, the Mosquito was the answer. Under the command of Group Captain Percy Pickard, of Target for Tonight fame, 80 mosquitoes targeted the walls of the Amiens prison and successfully breached them. Although 102 prisoners were killed, 255 men escaped. Unfortunately, 182 of them were recaptured soon afterwards. But it was said by the resistance fighters they preferred to die by British bombs than be shot by German bullets. Ultimately, the raid allowed key information about Gestapo agents and informers to be sent back to London and kept the Germans guessing about the true location of the expected invasion of Europe. The Kleykamp Raid. The Mosquito must have seemed very much like the pesky insect to the Gestapo, because they were to be targeted by this aircraft time and time again. In the spring of 1940, the Netherlands was one of the countries to fall to the southern German onslaught. As an occupied country, resistance soon sprung up across the nation. In order to keep tabs on its stolen territory, the Germans implemented an obligatory identification card policy. This made it much easier for the Gestapo to root out resistance members. This is why, on the 11th of April 1944, a small force of 613 Squadron Mosquitoes launched a raid on an art gallery. The Kleykamp building in the middle of The Hague was a centre of art and culture until 1941. After that year, the 5-storey building was used to store a registry of information on Dutch civilians. At the bequest of resistance leaders, the RAF was tasked with destroying the building and, interestingly, they would be joined by a Dutch Jewish pilot who had escaped to England. Learning from previous missions, the raid was scheduled at 3 in the afternoon to minimise foot traffic around the building. The attack was quite simple. One wave flew over and dropped high explosive bombs to open the buildings up, and a second wave covered it with incendiary bombs. As the Mosquitoes hightailed it out of Holland, the Gestapo were left with a bonfire on their hands, and the threat for the Dutch resistance movement was greatly reduced. Aarhus Air Raid. The RAF launched 2 famous precision attacks with Mosquitoes in Denmark, both targeting the Gestapo. The first was perhaps the most challenging and was deemed a complete success. By late 1944, the Danish resistance groups around Jutland were on the brink of total exposure. They had been devastated by informants and the Gestapo's ability to extract names from captured members and aid. If a resistance effort was to remain in that area of the country, something would have to be done, and done quickly. As the Danish resistance was in no position to attack and destroy Gestapo records then being held at Aarhus University, the RAF was called in again to show just what the Mosquito could do. Of all the raids I'm going to talk about here, this is perhaps the craziest yet. The dormitories of the university where the Gestapo records were held was directly in between 2 civilian hospitals. To hit the target and not kill hundreds of innocents was a very tall order indeed. After a lot of practice using simulated chalked out areas on the ground, 24 Mosquitoes and 12 escorting Mustangs took off on the 31st of October 1944, bound for Jutland. As with the Kleykamp Raid earlier that year, the Mosquitoes attacked in waves, with the first bombs aimed to blast the roof off the buildings. The following Mosquitoes dropped incendiaries to ensure the total destruction of any record. The raid was timed to coincide with lunch, and this meant that a lot more Germans than civilians were trapped in the raid. Resistance members later reported that the building was set on fire and many important Gestapo personnel were killed. In addition, some Danish resistance fighters managed to escape in the confusion. Nevertheless, some bombs did go astray and several civilians also lost their lives. When it comes to precision and airmanship, the raid on Aarhus has to be high on the list. Operation Carthage. On the 21st of March 1945, Mosquitoes would target the Gestapo again, this time in the capital of Denmark, Copenhagen. The target was called Shellhus, and just like Aarhus, it was the local headquarters of the Gestapo. However, this mission would not be the same as the others launched before. Perhaps learning from previous attacks on their headquarters, the Gestapo were using Danish resistance fighters as human shields by holding them in attic cells. This fact, perhaps they hoped, would discourage the RAF from burning Shellhus down by attacking it from above. Unfortunately, the Gestapo had forgotten about Operation Jericho. The RAF had not. In a daring mission, the mosquitoes would target the lower floors of the Gestapo HQ by swooping low over the rooftops of Copenhagen. There was one way in and one way out of the target, and the mosquito pilots would need all their skills to hit the building without killing the 30 or so prisoners. In the end, the 20-strong mosquito force did manage to locate and hit their intended target, but disaster also struck. In a series of disastrous events, a Catholic school was also bombed, killing several children. If you want to know more about this, then you should watch my suggested video at the end of this one. So what do you think? Which of these mosquito raids was the most daring? Leave me a comment below and maybe I'll make a video about it soon. And if you've liked this video, then please give it a like to help it spread to more people. And to learn more about Operation Carthage, then click on the video on screen now. Thanks for watching and see you next time.